It's time for Come and Talk It with your host, Michael Cargill, brought to you by Texas Law Shield. Over the last decade, Michael has championed and supported the rights of law-abiding Texans to own and use firearms. He is the owner of Central Texas Gun Works, a veteran of the United States Army, and has achieved national exposure in such prestigious media outlets such as Forbes Magazine, Fox Business News, CNN Money, AOL, BBC World News, Huffington Post, and the New York Times. Cargill vigorously defends lawful gun ownership in this country without regard to party politics. And now, here's Michael Cargill.
Good day, Austin, Texas, the live music capital of the world. Let's praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. I tell you, Zach, we got a lot of stuff to talk about today because we have those cheerleaders that were shot at in Manor. We're going to talk about that. Department of Public Safety is patrolling Austin, Texas, and we're going to talk about that. That's going on. Austin Police Department said they're short, almost 300 police officers, so they need assistance. So we're going to, talk to some people about that. Chris Harris is on the phone with the Austin Justice Coalition, and we're going to talk to him about that and see what's going on, their take, their stance on, how they feel about what's happening with DPS in the Austin Police Department. Going to talk about the homeless situation here in Austin. Also, we're going to talk about, remember that shooting that happened? The guy that actually had the AR-15 and he thought someone was inside of his home, so he was shooting inside of his home.
In East Austin?
Right, in East Austin.
Rajesh Moonsingh? Right?
Yeah, Mr. Moonsingh. We're going to talk about that as well. So, let's get right into it. So I want to bring into the conversation Chris Harris. Chris, welcome to Come and Talk It, sir.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Chris, the Austin Police Department, you say they're short 300 officers, and they're having a hard time keeping up with the 911 calls and all that stuff. They don't have enough, boots on the ground, so they need assistance from the Department of Public Safety, the state police. And I'm curious, where in the world is the sheriff? Where's the Travis County Sheriff's Department? Because I thought the way it's supposed to go is, you have the city police, and then if the city can't handle it, you have the county. The county steps in. They can't handle it. Then they ask for the state police, the DPS. I thought that was the hierarchy. That was just my impression. But what's your take on what's going on here in Austin, Texas?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, what's going on with the county, I think really speaks to the broader issues that APD is facing that aren't just unique to Austin, right? You saw in Dallas, Mayor Johnson up there, really begging, law enforcement to come work in Dallas because they're short too. And that's also the situation that you see at Travis County. You've got, real shortages of folks to work, particularly at the jail, that the sheriff there has been dealing with. And I think, at the end of the day, around the country, you see police departments struggling to retain folks, struggling to recruit and attract folks. So I think it's a bigger issue with policing in general, as far as a lot of the staffing issues that are going on.
Okay, so how do you think the DPS is actually handling their job? Because the Austin Police Department, they're saying that crime is down since DPS has been patrolling in Austin, and a lot of people that I've talked to, reach out to different citizens in North Austin, Central Austin, South Austin. We've gone out on the streets there and talked to people, and they say they feel a lot safer now because now we have troopers that are patrolling, and it seems like crime is down in just over, just in 2 weeks.
Yeah, so, I think there are definitely duties that Austin police, could probably use help with. I think the question is what DPS is doing, what they're actually doing, a reliable, sustainable way to reduce crime, and is it also, causing more harm than it's helping? So, unfortunately, what we see is, particularly in low-income communities of color, a lot of heavy patrols and a lot of low-level traffic stops, which appear to be pretext stops. And there's no evidence that these types of patrols in the long term are going to help reliably reduce violence in the community But we do know that it's going to rope a lot more people into the criminal legal system. So they're going to deal with car impoundments. They're going to deal with bail fees. They're going to deal with potentially criminal histories. They're going to deal with all the things that come, potentially a criminal, inability to get jobs and things like that down the line with these interactions. And, if we're not talking about actually interrupting someone committing some sort of violent act, then I question whether or not it's really about improving safety or if it's really about the idea, the theater of safety, because some people feel more safe when they see police officers around, but of course many don't. So for us, it's really a question of what are they doing, and how can they actually meaningfully contribute to safety in our community. And there are some things that definitely should be done, right? Like we understand that their specialty is traffic enforcement. So we've had a lot more traffic fatalities. We understand there's a lot more dangerous driving going on. Most of those fatalities happen on the freeways, which are already state property. This seems like a very useful use of their skills. But again, what we're seeing, where they're just blanketing certain communities, which happen to be the areas with the most Black and brown folks, this doesn't seem fair. This doesn't seem just, and it doesn't seem like over the long haul it's going to meaningfully improve the safety.
Okay. And what some people are saying, Chris, is that, and we're talking with Chris Harris, and you were at Austin Justice Coalition, right? That's correct. Okay, good. All right, so we're talking with Chris Harris, and we're talking about DPS, Department of Public Safety. We're talking about, is it good to have DPS here assisting the Austin Police Department with crime issue, reducing crime, or augmenting them a little bit because they're short some 300 officers? Because the report from the Austin Police Department between March 30th and April 3rd, they actually were 1,570 traffic stops, 765 citations, 15 crash investigations, 52 felony arrests, 31 misdemeanor arrests, 6 stolen vehicles recovered, 11 firearms seized, 174 grams of cocaine seized, 40 grams of heroin seized, 127,415 grams of methamphetamine. What is it, Zach? Thank you. Methamphetamine seized, and 3 street takeover events were actually, stopped because of DPS. So we're talking about, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What's going on? What's your take on it? Our call-in number is 512-643-5483. That is 512-643-5483. Give me a call and let me know. What's your take on, is DPS doing a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is this are we over-policing people that are typically over-policed? Or are they targeting, because some people are saying, hey, they're just going into those areas that are high crime areas, and that's typically where the crimes are. And that's where they're sending the police officers, or they're sending DPS. So we come back. Give me a call, 512-643-5483. This is Michael Cargill, and you are listening to Come and Talk It. This is what happens.
Peace. This is Maj Toure. You're listening to Come and Talk It Radio with Michael Cargill.
Your business is going to have technical problems. There's no question about it. Pacific Office Automation is your guide, because problem solving is our passion. Every business is unique, no matter how big or how small the problem. From copiers and printers, telephone systems, managed IT, print services, and more, we offer integrated, streamlined office solutions to keep your office humming. With Pacific Office Automation, it's problem solved. Visit pacificoffice.com today to find out more.
I'm a U.S. Army veteran with a strong sense of duty and respect for our system of government. After 12 years, I was honorably discharged and decided I would fulfill the American dream of entrepreneurship and open up a gun shop in Austin, Texas. At my shop, I teach people to be law-abiding and how to safely use their firearm. On page 46, going to talk about Penal Code Section 46.02. The day that ban went into effect, I went into my local ATF in Austin and turned over my bump stock because I'm a law-abiding citizen. But I wasn't going down without a legal fight. So that's why I reached out to NCLA.
NCLA is representing Michael Cargill because federal agencies do not have the power to rewrite statutes. Bump stocks are not machine guns. If Congress wants to change the law and ban bump stocks, it certainly can do so. But we can't have the executive branch rewriting a statute and putting people in jail for up to 10 years.
It's a problem because, this government agency has said, you know what, something that is legal is now illegal, and we're going to confiscate it from you, and we're not going to compensate you for it, and you're going to become a criminal.
The goal of our case here is to tell the ATF that they can't get away with this kind of administrative lawmaking. This isn't constitutionally permissible, and this goes against everything that our nation was founded on.
The bump stock ban turned innocent law-abiding citizens into criminals overnight, even though they were compliant with the statute. And that's not right.
This case is not about where you stand on bump stocks. It's about the rule of law. It's about whether an agency can rewrite a statute and turn a law-abiding citizen into a criminal. If the ATF can ban bump stocks, any agency can ban anything.
Welcome back to Come and Talk It. And now here's Michael Cargill.
All right, so we're talking about the Department of Public Safety of Texas actually augmenting the Austin Police Department and helping them reduce crime. So according to the ACLU says DPS has a record of making communities across Texas less safe. From DPS lethal mismanagement during the Uvalde school shooting to their anti-immigrant role in Abbott's Operation Lone Star, they've shown a lack of accountability, transparency, and concern for the locals. The ACLU concluded this message by saying that we can't arrest our way out of homelessness, unemployment, and poverty, and that investing in services like affordable housing and job training is a more effective solution than over-policing and intimidation. And that's from the ACLU. So they also go on to say that DPS has no patrol in Austin, monitoring our communities and criminalizing our neighbors. The organization added, ACLU continues to say that they have reason to worry that DPS's involvement will lead to more stops and citations, creating unnecessary contacts with law enforcement, especially for people of color. So we have on the phone Chris with Austin Justice Coalition. And so, Chris Harris, what's your take on that and what the ACLU says?
Yeah, I largely agree with that. I think, you mentioned about, the reason that, that's been given that DPS might be patrolling certain neighborhoods over other, right? That they're quote unquote high crime areas. And I mean, I understand the logic, but just because you live in an area that has quote unquote high crime, and we can talk about what types of crime we're not including and not including in that definition, but that doesn't mean that you've caused harm. It doesn't mean that you should be subjected to, sort of rampant traffic stops and potential criminalization. It doesn't mean that you should feel fear to leave your house every day. Just because you live in an area like this doesn't mean that you should be, harassed. So to me, again, the question is, what is actually effective at preventing crime? What actually will, particularly the worst types, the most violent crime and forms of harm, and how can we deploy resources in a way that's going to do that, not just do this thing where we have a bunch of police that are around, so it looks like there's something going on, but in fact, we're just seizing mostly possession level drugs and fewer guns that'll be bought at Walmart in the next half hour, and not really meaningfully impacting people's safety.
Okay, so and I know that the jails in Travis County for I think 2 weekends in a row were actually pretty packed. I'm hearing that there was actually chaos down there at the jail. So many people that were brought in had a hard time keeping up. But these were actually arrests that were justified. People actually committed crimes, and DPS says, hey, their job is to follow state law. They're law enforcement officers, so their job is to enforce all laws as they would in any community. They say they're very consistent. What's your take on that, Chris?
Well, I have no doubt. Well, I have some doubt about that, but I think the overarching issue is where are they deployed and why, right? Like, there's plenty of DWI, domestic violence, drug use, even illegal gun ownership in all parts of the city. But they're concentrating their patrols just in certain neighborhoods. And again, it's not fair. And then, of course, there's a whole bunch of things that are technically crimes, things like wage theft, things like a whole lot of white collar crimes that there's really no one out trying to find the people, crashing the global economy and ruining people's retirements. Like, no, instead we're going to just, hyper patrol certain neighborhoods, pull over everyone, whether we have a reason to or not, and fish to see if these people might, have some drugs or a gun on them. And, again, this is more security theater than actual safety, in my view.
All right. So, the most dangerous neighborhoods we have is in Georgian Acres. That's in North Austin there, like Northeast Austin. And the residential areas, has a population of like 9,600 and the worst levels of crime in the city. And the crime rate in that area, Georgian Acres, is like 10,925 per 100,000 in 2022, which is a whopping 365% higher than national average. So that's the area that, they sent the DPS troopers to actually patrol in that area to the highest crime areas that we have actually in the city.
Again, crime based on where the police have been before. So, there's a lot of self-reinforcement with a lot of crime statistics. If I never patrol in West Austin, then I never find any crime. And my stats will never say this is a high crime area, right? So there's a lot of self-reinforcement as it comes to this. And then the other thing, of course, when you talk about crime is what are we talking about? Is this something actually causing harm that needs to be intervened in immediately? Is this a crime against the state? Is this a crime against property? And then if so, what actually is the right intervention? Again, you can take somebody poor off the street for some minor crime against property, but they're going to come out at some point in the not too distant future. They're still going to be poor, now even poorer probably, with less to their name. And what is the most likely scenario for that person? So again, are we actually meaningfully interrupting, harmful behaviors and making our community safer? Or are we just pretending to do something about it by putting folks in jail for a little bit and then, bringing them back to the community even worse off than before a few months or years later?
All right. And so you're saying that, the people's, they're having an experience in a false sense of security there because they're feeling safe now over the last 2 weeks because we're not, a lot of people are not hearing gunshots like they, were in the last 2 years in certain neighborhoods. You're not hearing random, what we call desk pops or whatever, people driving down the road just firing shots in the air for no reason. That has come to almost a complete halt in this entire city. And then you're not seeing people at the gas stations who are getting robbed at the gas station. I'm not seeing 13, 14, 15-year-olds that actually go into 7-Eleven and holding up 7-Eleven at 4 o'clock in the morning. That has actually come down to a complete halt. And that, for the last 2 weeks.
I mean, I haven't seen, data about any of that sort of stuff. Obviously, a lot of that behavior is what I would consider harmful and requires some intervention. So, again, I think there's right at this point, all we have is a lot of anecdotes and stories, and that includes us too, right? Those of us talking about the over-policing and the harassment.
Now, what would be your solution? So, what would be your solution instead of APD requesting the assistance from DPS? How would you think we should actually handle the issues that we're having in this city as far as crime?
Yeah, well, again, I think it very much depends on what exactly it is you're talking about, because, again, all crime is not the same. There are crimes that are actually meaningful, harmful, that cause harm to other people and require intervention. Then there's crimes against the state and crimes against property, which overwhelmingly might benefit from some different type of prevention-oriented approach rather than, having people immediately intervene and put people in jail for a little bit, and then they come back out worse off. So, if we're talking about the issue of gun violence, again, I think that there's a lot that can be done with regard to meaningfully intervening with the communities and people that have been impacted by that, meaning firstly, having folks that establish relationships in those communities, people that already are from those communities, that are ambassadors for conflict intervention, conflict resolution, so that we don't see cycles of violence. I think, honestly, my personal take, I know you will disagree on this, is we should have a very different approach to how we allow people to sell, particularly guns in the country, and in order to reduce access to a lot of different types of guns. And then I think that, obviously in some cases where there's a harm being caused right now in this moment, you need someone to intervene. You need someone to go and to stop that. And obviously that's a role that's currently performed by police. So again, it really does depend on what it is that you're dealing with. I think when you look at, things like where, there's lots of sex work and things like that, or drug trade going on, the evidence is really clear that the war on drugs has not worked at all. Drugs are more accessible, more deadly than they've ever been after 40 years. Criminalizing sex work has not reduced it. It's called the oldest profession for a reason. So we really have to take different tacks with a lot of the things that are called crime today as well.
All right. We come back from the break. I'm going to ask Chris about, the crimes that are against person, because right now the things that people have complained about for the last 2 years in 2020 and 2021 and the last 3 years in 2022 was that, the fact that business owners are getting broken into and that, ladies are being assaulted as they're trying to jog, in the morning or in the evening, afternoon, whatever. Their homes are being broken into. We don't have police are not responding, to those 911 calls because they say they don't have enough police officers on the street to handle that. So I'm curious, how do we solve that problem? And then we'll talk about the drugs. And I also want to talk about Mr. Moonsing, and also that shooting. We come back from the break and I'll talk about all that. This is Michael Cargill, and you are listening to Come and Talk It.
Folks, this is Doug Man Jones. And I get my gun news from Michael Cargill at Come and Talk It.
Whether it's a typical traffic stop or you're just involved in a use of force incident, encounters with law enforcement can be scary and stressful. In the heat of the moment, you may inadvertently say something you don't mean or make an inconsistent statement. These are red flags for officers, and if they think you're lying or your story doesn't add up, they might arrest you and let the criminal justice system decide your fate. Police officers are trained to get information from you without making the interaction seem like a formal interrogation. But remember, from the moment an officer arrives on scene, everything you say and everything you do will be scrutinized in court. The prosecuting attorney will attempt to use anything and everything against you. So what do you say? You say, "I invoke my right to remain silent," and then let your attorney interact with law enforcement on your behalf. One important note though, do not throw common sense out the window. For example, if the intruder's hiding somewhere in your house when the police arrive, or if you saw the perpetrator pitch his weapon into your backyard, quickly tell the police and then stop talking. You might ask, what about my rights? What if the police never read me my Miranda rights? Miranda rights is the common name for a collection of rights contained in the Miranda warnings, given to suspects when they're placed under arrest. The warning comes from a 1966 Supreme Court case, Miranda v. Arizona. In that case, the court held that statements from a custodial interrogation would not be admissible unless proper procedural safeguards were in place to protect the defendant's Fifth Amendment rights. We've all seen these warnings on TV and movies. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to have an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, and so on. So do police have to read you your rights? No. It's important to note that officers are not required to read you these rights unless you're in custody and subjected to interrogation. If the police show up to a crime scene and start asking you general questions and you voluntarily tell them everything that happened, those statements can be used against you regardless of the Miranda warnings because you're not in custody. If you're put in handcuffs but you say something incriminating on your own without being questioned, those statements can and will be used against you because you're not being interrogated. You're just starting to spout off. This is why it's imperative that you know your rights and you shouldn't rely on the police to read them.
Welcome back to Come and Talk It. And now here's Michael Cargill.
All right, we're talking with Chris Harris with the Austin Justice Coalition, and we're talking about crime in Austin, Texas, or major cities around the country, really. We're focusing on Austin, but it seems to be the same thing in all of these cities. You know, your big, large cities, where it's Houston, Dallas, Austin, you know, Minneapolis, you know, New York. Seems to be the same common theme where, you know, we're short on officers, and I think we're in a great place when we're talking about police accountability. We do need to hold our police officers accountable, absolutely, and I think we need more police officers on top of that. But you know, there's some people that think, you know, a different way, and Chris, you know, thinks a little differently. And I believe it. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, Chris. You think we need less officers, and we need to focus on our resources on other things. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. You know, we're still spending about you know, more than a third of the city's budget, and if you look around the country, city after city, it's, you know, anywhere from a third to 40+% of resources go into policing, and you know, you know, this strategy really, you know, if we look around the world, is not one that's particularly successful comparatively to similar countries that tout, you know, democratic styles of governance and open markets. You know, on the whole, our cities aren't as safe as their cities.
All right, okay. Yeah. So the problem that I think people are upset about is the fact that we have district attorneys like the district attorney we have here in Travis County. When someone is arrested, you know, and it's a repeat arrest. Same person arrested over and over and over again, and they tend to graduate and get more and more aggressive. Their crimes get a little more serious each time after the arrest, but the DA is not taking up the charge and prosecuting that person. And then, behold, you know, down the road, then this person ends up killing someone, you know, commits murder, when we had the chance to stop that, you know, at the lower level.
Yeah, I have to question the premise of that. You know, you know, I'm sure there are some anecdotes about individuals like that, but I'm not sure there's evidence that this is a pervasive problem of people gradually stepping up their level of harm they're causing because of some inaction by, you know, some part of the criminal legal system. I think that, and again, I think there's two sides to all of this stuff. One is the intervention for the harmful thing happening right now, which of course should happen. But are we actually doing all we can to prevent things from occurring? And do we actually focus on the creating a sort of communities, environments where you know, our young people grow into people that you know, respect, you know, other people's autonomy, property, safety, consent, and also have the means to actually become, you know, a productive member of their community by virtue of having a good school and opportunity. And if we're not doing those things, then I don't know what we would expect of particularly folks coming up in our communities.
Chris, you brought up a good point earlier about the war on drugs and how the restrictions on drugs basically, you know, are not effective, right? Mm-hmm. Same thing with the sex work. You know, the restrictions in place just create this underground market for that, right?
That's right. And those underground markets breed more violence, which, you know, I think is it's not solely responsible for the violence that we see in our communities, but it is part of it.
Yeah, so the restrictions, they really don't work there. But then you mentioned that you thought that firearms should be restricted more the way they're sold in gun stores. Did you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, well, I won't. This is not an area of expertise for me, so I want to preface this with that. But yeah, I think that I'm not a supporter of. I think the more general gun possession crimes that you see, and the approach to criminalizing individual gun owners that you see. I think that's ineffective, and honestly, because of how police patrol and how they operate, it ends up having huge racial discriminatory impacts that are unjust. But I do think that that the big difference that we have from so many other places in the world that are similar but are safer is that we have these loosened restrictions on the manufacturer, the sale, and ultimately the way that you can carry them. And I operate in the world that I live in, not in like a fantasy world. So I'm not necessarily saying I think we can do something major about that overnight, but I do think that those countries point a way forward in terms of really improving at least our safety as it relates to being victims of gun crime.
All right, so let's take the majority of your gun crimes are going to be your smaller handguns, semi-automatic handguns, and stuff like that. So it's not going to be your they don't use rifles, shotguns, things of those nature to commit the majority of those crimes. So it's typically your handguns. So I don't know how we would stop that because we already have you have a ton of laws in place already. You're not allowed to kill someone, you can't murder someone, all that kind of stuff. So kind of help me out a little more. How would we go about doing this? What can we do? I'm looking for some real solutions here.
Well, I'm not under the impression that this is in any way a possibility in the short term, but you have countries that have banned, specific types of guns like handguns, and I think to really positive effect. Again, I don't think there's an issue with rifles and shotguns and a lot of things really more designed to kill animals than the stuff that's makes it much easier to kill people.
Right. Do you own any firearms yourself?
I will decline to answer that question.
I take that as a yes. You can tell me I'm your friend. Okay. All right.
So if we banned all handguns, let's say, do you think that the criminals who would use them in crimes would turn them over to law enforcement? Or they would keep them?
Obviously, I think that, where you've seen bans of handguns executed, there are, periods of time where, people are allowed to turn them in or trade them in. And then, following, some point in time, then the guns were, if that particular type of gun, which was no longer able to be sold, were found, then it were confiscated. So I think, it's not a overnight thing by any stretch, and hasn't been in the countries that have done it. But I think over the time with, really limiting, just the number of guns out there in a real way, not the way that happens with these pretext traffic stops where, again, what they say, they've seized 11 guns in a couple of weeks. I mean, again, you're going to see more guns sold at Walmart, here in a few minutes than that. So that's not a meaningful, way to address this issue in my mind.
Yeah, well, Walmart, they actually stopped selling guns. They don't sell guns anymore, and they sell very little ammunition. Now, so do you think that we should only have police officers? They should be the only ones that actually have the firearms?
Well, I think that you see in countries like the UK, 89, 90% of their officers don't carry guns either. I think obviously you can't, disarm one side you can't disarm the the police and allow the community to continue to have them. I don't get that, but I do think that, ideally, and again, this is an ideal scenario, not necessarily something I think that is in any way on the table or possible in the short term at all here. But I think that's a good way to reduce gun crime. And again, UK has very, very little gun crime, and they also have very, very few killings by police.
And Mike, let me hop up in here. This is Harvey. Chris, I like a lot of the stuff you've been saying, but in the last few minutes, as we're getting into less police officers, less guns, I mean, especially here in Texas, I just don't think that's realistic, especially the guns. What I would say is that
I agree with you.
right, yeah. So, I mean, this is getting to like a little bit of a can of worms here. So, like, what I would say is that we just passed constitutional carry here in Texas, which would help alleviate some of these issues with police officers stopping individuals for guns indiscriminately. But what I've been saying here on Come and Talk It is really that we need police officers to enforce laws against violent crimes, right? If it's a violent crime, we need to make sure we're taking care of it. But like you said, we have drugs, we have nonviolent crimes, and we don't need road pirates. We don't need police officers stopping people for their registration, for a license plate that's not on the front end. There's various different things like that where we see DPS coming in and busting people for marijuana again, right? Like if they were coming in and they were taking care of violent crime, I think that would be better. But really, this is something, if Austin Police Department really wanted to address this issue, they would be focusing on violent criminals rather than all of this, the very insignificant traffic violence or traffic issues, drug crime, stuff like that. What is your take on that? Is there something where we can better focus police officers' attention here to solve the problem?
I think so, for sure, and I agree with that. I think rather than going after people even just for gun possession, really the use of a gun is going to be your telltale sign that, in a harmful way, is going to be your telltale sign that somebody is one, has done something harmful, but also that they might do it again in the future. What we see from the data is that people that just own a gun that are being criminalized for that, by and large, they've never they haven't committed crimes in the past, and they won't in the future. So that's just a big sweep of people. And again, often ends up being people based on what community they live in or the color of their skin. So I think, I'm sorry, I might have missed the question.
No, you're fine. You're fine. So yeah, we were talking about the first part you answered. What I was saying was that I've been talking about here on Come and Talk It is making sure police officers are not road pirates. They're not stopping people for low-level possession of drugs. They're not stopping people to give someone a ticket. And I think probably what a lot is happening right now in DPS is they're saying, oh, you don't have your registration, you don't have the right tag, something like that. Especially here in Austin, there's a lot of people that have said, oh, well, the cops are not out, I don't need to get this. Is there a way we can refocus police officers' attention? Because like you said, if someone is committing like a crime with a gun, there's not enough police officers in the city to focus to get that taken care of. I would say that if Austin PD really wanted to make a big difference, they would be specifically focusing on violent crime over anything else. Do you think there's something that like our police officers or even DPS could be doing to have a better focus in one area rather than just, like you would say, and I would agree with, indiscriminately going out throughout Austin and just busting individuals for all sorts of crime, whether it's insignificant or big?
And I'll let you answer that on the other side of the break. This is Michael Cargill, and you are listening to Come and Talk It.
Hi, this is Stephen Williford, the Barefoot Defender. I get my global gun news from Michael Cargill at Come and Talk It.
He didn't act that way. He never flinched. He went for his pockets. And when he went for his pockets, I thought my heart was going to stop. I mean, Hi, my name's Jerry. The incident we're going to talk about took place in early March of 2017. Started back about 3 years ago. We had a fella in the neighborhood that nobody really knew. We weren't familiar with him, and he was pretty regular about speeding up and down the street. It escalated into more speeding, threats. He chunked some rocks up into the yard, and broke my windshield in my truck, and it escalated from that into death threats. And he was constantly chirping about how he was gonna end it, and he was gonna kill so-and-so, he was gonna kill me, and it was all chirping. The day of the confrontation, I was leaving the neighborhood and heading to a meeting downtown Fort Worth. It was a beautiful day, I had my windows down, I was in my Suburban. As I was heading out, just about to leave my neighborhood, this guy comes into the neighborhood, sees me coming out, pulls into my lane, causes me to stop, and then he kind of cut at an angle in front of me and jumped out of his truck and ran at the side of my Suburban, saying, "Today's the day you're gonna die, he's gonna end it." He comes over and he's slamming his hands up against the side of my vehicle, my truck. But he's screaming at me, telling me he's gonna kill me, he's gonna end it, this is the day I'm gonna die. He reaches in to try and open up my door. I grabbed my weapon, I put my weapon right at his chest at the window and told him to get back, told him get the hell back. And he never did. He never moved, he never changed anything. He went for his pockets, shuffling into his pockets, and he pulls out his cell phone. I drove off around and called 911 before I got to the end of my street. Yeah, I've carried a weapon for pretty near 20 years, and I've never had to pull my weapon out. Now, I can tell you that when you do that, the emotions are incredible. You feel the flush come through your body because you just pulled a weapon on somebody, you're pointing a gun at somebody, and they don't move. And that's a whole nother, they didn't say, "Whoa, I'm stop," like anybody that you'd think would do that, but he didn't act that way. He never flinched. He went for his pockets, and when he went for his pockets, I thought my heart was gonna stop. I was actually told that if he would have pulled out a gun, he'd have shot me before I could have actually pulled the trigger, and that's pretty awakening. I contacted Texas Law Shield and spoke with them, and got a statement that I wrote, and I turned it in the following day. And it was subsequent to that I was told that I was going to.
Welcome back to Come and Talk It. And now here's Michael Cargill.
All right, I tell you what I'm seeing. I don't want my numbers to go up as far as like a lot of arrests, people put in jail and having to, get an attorney and all that stuff. What I want is I want to see the police officer in uniform, and the criminals are afraid to commit the crimes they want to commit because the police officer is present. And I think that's the goal and that's the purpose. By showing a show of force, by just having that presence there in the city. I jump on the Interstate 35 and I'm driving on Interstate 35 and you see a police officer there in that middle lane, it makes everyone tend to not cross across, like 4 lanes of traffic in a second, not make that left turn in the middle of the road, or that U-turn you're not supposed to do it, or run that red light or run that stop sign and actually cause an accident. So just by having that police presence, I think it actually has, it shows something and it reduces something. And I think that's a great thing. I think having the DPS troopers here is definitely a good thing because I'm not hearing those gunshots. I'm not, seeing the reports on none of my, my apps that I get all of my reporting from of a crime happening over here or happening over there. Someone shot here, someone shot there. I'm seeing a lot of that stuff has been reduced. I don't know why. I can't explain it why, but I'm just saying the numbers are down, and everywhere that I see it. And you probably want to rephrase your question and ask it one more time.
Sure, yeah. Well, like I said, this is the topic I've been talking about on Come and Talk It for a while. I always said that if we want to have some big changes here in Austin, that we should stop having road piracy, pirates on the road, which are essentially police officers stopping people for low-level possession of drugs, for minor traffic crimes, and truly going after hard criminals, murder, rape, if you actually have gunshots going on, investigating those crimes. And so that's my proposal. Having the Austin PD shift focus to that, and also if we're going to invite DPS in, having their focus be on true crimes rather than these insignificant crimes such as small amount of drug possession and these insignificant traffic and citations.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah. I mean, I think on the whole, I agree with that. When they've done analysis of 911 calls, that like 40% of them are like disturbance calls. And the vast majority of those don't result in any sort of police report. I think a lot of them can be chalked up as like, I saw someone I don't recognize in my neighborhood, please come and take a look at it, stuff like that. We're talking about less than 2% of calls are about some sort of actual violent thing in progress. There's the manpower to deal with those issues. I think even now, I think the problem is that when you have this tug of war between actually addressing the things that are causing the most harm and this desire by some of the community, and I think that you just expressed, Michael, to just see a lot of police all the time. I think those two things are somewhat in conflict. Like, it's hard to have a constant presence everywhere, and also be concentrating on actually solving the bad things that happen. And I think what the data shows is that that's of course, a police officer is going to deter something right around them. People are not generally going to commit a lot of things right in their presence, though some Friday, Saturday nights on 6th Street, might go against that. But then also just the idea that you will be caught, meaning you were investigated and you were caught and everyone knows that you did something. That's the big deterrent. It's not the prison sentence. It's not the length of the prison sentence. It's the act of being caught. Now, when you talk about patrolling, this last thing is, I hear you. You're less likely to speed or do something in the presence of an officer. And I think if there's a role for DPS here on the freeways, makes the most sense to me. But, often what we'll see, and I think that's what's going to be interesting as time moves forward with this, is that, harmful things will just move, right? They'll just move where police are not. And unless you actually want to live in a police state where there's a policeman visible on every corner, all hour of every day, that is not a meaningful, that's not a long-term solution to preventing the sort of behaviors that we all find harmful.
All right.
Yeah, let me ask you one more thing then. I think there was something that you were saying earlier, Chris, about having, police officers more engaged in their communities. Michael's saying trying to have more police officers present. I would say that community policing was a good thing. Having, police officers on a certain block actually in the community making themselves known. That's a little bit of both, right? Being in the community and then also having that presence there. Is that something that you would agree with, or what's your take on that?
I mean, I think in theory, yeah. I mean, and honestly, it does a little bit of both things, right? Because then you also, if you're trusted by the community and people in the community, then you're more easily able to leverage those relationships to actually find out who did something when something bad happens. I think, unfortunately, the reality is that we just haven't seen it work like that, at least not for long periods of time. And honestly, I think it's, again, about these dueling priorities that the public, that a lot of people in the business interests, give police, such that the institution often ends up going back in this way of, let's just do the drug war again and criminalize a bunch of folks and deter trust. And then obviously, you see, them actively fight accountability and transparency, which also breeds distrust. And so it's, I think for me and my organization, it's really the institution that we're very skeptical of. And I think many of the tasks that they have, many of the duties, not all of them, but many of them are needed, but we're not sure that they're the right institution to do them because of this history.
I hear you. I mean, I think that there's things that we should be doing. I think that would be one of the things, though, is ending the drug war, right? Getting to community policing, not just community policing, but hiring people within their communities. But this goes to a bigger question. This is why I think there should be hard line things that we should be doing in our criminal justice and law enforcement that just politicians and people in general are just not taking seriously and they're not doing. But there are individuals like you that say we essentially, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, that we need to do away with this institution. What would we do without some type of peacekeeper institution? I'm not insinuating that currently police officers are a peacekeeping institution. I'm saying they should be.
Well, I think that I think again, I operate in the world of today, and then I have my my pie in the sky long term. I don't ever envision seeing that world exist. Idea of utopia, right? And I think I would love to live in a world that was free of all forms of coercion, both, and that includes interpersonal and from the state. Meaning that no one's going to tell me what to do or how to live or how to be, because obviously that can't happen unless there's a different type of society where we're not constantly having lots of conflict, where we're not constantly having lots of things that make it difficult for us to all live harmoniously. So I think that's where that mindset comes from. But I think in the short term, it's really about what can we do today better, maybe with different people, or if it's the same people, like how can it be better such that it's more fair, more just, and actually reduces harm, reduces violence the most. And really just constantly questioning that and trying to never just take things for granted about how things are.
All right. Now, keep in mind, here in Austin, we've had some really crazy things happen. Remember the Austin bombing? Remember that? Remember the rock thrower? Remember that person that was throwing the rocks and stuff like that? And then, you go back to other things like, and then you think of how some of these people were caught, You think of the Oklahoma City bomber, Thomas Harrison mentioned this, is that he was caught because of issues with his vehicle, just simple little paperwork issue with the vehicle, or light out or something that something very minor, and that's how he was caught. You go to the 6th Street shooter that we had that did the mass shooting on 6th Street. He actually was involved in, another shooting prior to that shooting, but he wasn't prosecuted for the first shooting, so he was allowed to do the second shooting. So, and this has happened time and time again. If you look at some of the things that have actually happened here in Austin, and it's not the first time that person's been in trouble with law enforcement, but they weren't prosecuted by the district attorney. And you just pick any situation, any case, and I'll show you where this person actually had some type of issue, and nothing was done about it, and it eventually goes back to like the DA's office, or it could be a family issue, something as simple as that. Family not doing what they're supposed to do on their side. So it's when all these things fail, then I think it's right for law enforcement to step in and do what they need to do. So we need more police officers out on the street to handle this stuff. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about this and more. This is Michael Cargill, and you are listening to Come and Talk It.
Your business is going to have technical problems. There's no question about it. Pacific Office Automation is your guide because problem solving is our passion. Every business is unique, no matter how big or how small the problem. From copiers and printers, telephone systems, managed IT, print services, and more, we offer integrated, streamlined office solutions to keep your office humming. With Pacific Office Automation, it's problem solved. Visit pacificoffice.com today to find out more.
a U.S. Army veteran with a strong sense of duty and respect for our system of government. After 12 years, I was honorably discharged and decided I would fulfill the American dream of entrepreneurship and open up a gun shop in Austin, Texas. At my shop, I teach people to be law-abiding and how to safely use their firearm. On page 46, going to talk about Penal Code Section 46.02. The day that ban went into effect, I went into my local ATF in Austin and turned over my bump stock because I'm a law-abiding citizen. But I wasn't going down without a legal fight. So that's why I reached out to NCLA.
NCLA is representing Michael Cargill because federal agencies do not have the power to rewrite statutes. Bump stocks are not machine guns. If Congress wants to change the law and ban bump stocks, it certainly can do so. But we can't have the executive branch rewriting a statute and putting people in jail for up to 10 years.
It's a problem because, this government agency has said, you know what, something that is legal is now illegal, and we're going to confiscate it from you, and we're not going to compensate you for it, and you're going to become a criminal.
The goal of our case here is to tell the ATF that they can't get away with this kind of administrative lawmaking. This isn't constitutionally permissible, and this goes against everything that our nation was founded on.
The bump stock ban turned innocent law-abiding citizens into criminals overnight, even though they were compliant with the statute. And that's not right.
This case is not about where you stand on bump stocks. It's about the rule of law. It's about whether an agency can rewrite a statute and turn a law-abiding citizen into a criminal. If the ATF can ban bump stocks, any agency can ban anything.
Welcome back to Come and Talk It. And now here's Michael Cargill.
Man, as we overlook the Westlake Hills Skycam and look across the downtown Austin, it's nice and gloomy and cool out there. Hope you're enjoying your day today. Let's go to some comments that I'm seeing online here. ATX Pam says, I wonder if Chris is familiar with the knife violence statistics in the UK. Someone else says the UK knife angel. And someone's... Angle? What's that? What's the knife angle?
It's not angel.
It's not angel. It's angle.
Angle.
Okay. All right. And then driving is a state-sanctioned privilege. Therefore, you should understand about traffic stops. What exactly is a low-level traffic violation? Failure to stop at a stop sign, failure to signal lane change, distracted driving kills. We live in a happy world of, sun and something. And then law-abiding citizens follow the laws. Sometimes we slip up and speed or not follow the laws. The LEO will let those people off with a warning.
That's not true.
And someone else says, nobody wants to see a drunk driver, and having traffic stops for failing to obey traffic laws is how you catch them. Life is not fair, never has been, and never will be, so get over it.
Okay, boomer.
And Ted Bundy was caught by a street cop, and Ted had a dead body in his car and talked his way out of being searched. So there's just some things that some people are saying online. I do want to change gears a little bit because we do need to get to the Mr. Moonsing. Talk about this case is Rajon Moonsing, who was shot last year back in November by Austin police officer. Mr. Rajon Moonsing thought that someone was actually inside of his home. And so he had an AR-15. He was standing out in the entrance of his home and fired shots into his house. And at the time that he fired those shots into his house, police had arrived on the scene because a neighbor had actually called police, who actually was a private security officer for a house that was in the neighborhood, called 911 to say this guy, may have needed some mental assistance or something of that nature and needed police for sure. Because he thought that someone was inside the home, and the private security officer who did the 911 call was, unsure about whether or not Mr. Mr. Rajon actually was seeing something, he was hallucinating. And so when police arrived at the scene, they heard those shots. They responded to the shots, ended up shooting Mr. Moonsingh and killing him. And so, Chris, what's your take on all this?
Yeah, well, again, operating in the world that we have, which is a world where, he had the right to own that gun. Obviously, he's on his own property, firing into his own home. It's a very unjust killing. And particularly if you look at the footage, one of the things that really stands out is that the officer says, drop your weapon. Instantaneously after saying that, he fires. Rajon had no opportunity to comply with that demand at all. So, this idea that, that there's some mental health thing or anything going on, there's just no evidence for it, and definitely should not have in any way influenced this person this officer not identifying themselves. They didn't have their lights or sirens on when they approached the house. They said, drop your weapon, and before a beat hit, they immediately fired and killed him. I feel like this is an area where, people who do support, expanded gun ownership rights, these are the types of cases where, and the Philando Castillos and people like that, where I really wish folks would speak up more, because, if we're going to have this place where people can own guns and have them, conceal them, open carry, whatever it might be, stand your ground laws, you can fire on your own property, then we also have to stand up for when police violate those rights and make sure that they apply equally to everybody.
And you actually cannot fire guns actually in the city limits of Austin, even on your own property. You can be in the county of Travis, but in the city of Austin, you cannot discharge a firearm. Just the mere fact that you discharged a firearm in the city, you're actually committing a crime. And so you have to prove that you're justified. And so police arrive at the scene, yes. And we tell people, that take classes with us that, if you have to defend yourself, absolutely defend yourself. Be aware of your surroundings at all times. Police arrive at the scene. You got to put the gun down immediately, because the police are always going to focus on the gun. And the caller said that there are some issues going on, and that's the information that the law enforcement had of what the caller was actually saying. The caller said, hey, this guy, maybe having a mental breakdown or something of that nature, so he may need some mental assistance or services, mental services or something of that nature. And that was mentioned first by the caller. So that's why they were, that's why that was actually an issue, in the first place.
I mean, I hear you. And again, not identifying themselves, not giving Rajon an opportunity to comply, to me makes this wholly unjustified. And I'm really eager to see, what the outcome of the internal investigation is. And
I agree. I agree that the shooting was really quick, way too fast. They didn't give him enough time to respond. I agree with that 100%, because he needed time to comply. Once you give orders, you got to give time for the orders to be heard and give the person time to comply. And, they didn't give him a chance
Yeah,
at
I was
all.
going to say, I remember when we brought this up, I think it was last year, at the beginning of this year, I said this is eerily similar of a lot of police cases where it's like, drop the gun, bang, bang, bang.
Right.
No, no time to even react, or like you said, Chris, they didn't identify themselves at all.
So they identified themselves. He just didn't hear. He
Well,
didn't
yeah,
hear
right.
because he was in that entryway, and when you're firing rounds with no ear protection,
Well,
I
didn't
don't
give,
know,
didn't
you-
give a chance, right?
Yeah, you're not going to hear anything.
Identify yourself, but didn't give a chance to react.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, definitely too quick. I agree with you on that one, 100%. All right. So but gun ownership is a good thing, right, Chris?
Again, I think there's many types of guns that
How do we
are
police?
not-
How do we police our communities if we can't? If I can't own a firearm to protect my community, if I can't own the firearm to protect my house, so I think gun ownership is a great thing for all citizens.
I think if we're going to have laws that protect the right of gun ownership, they should just apply equally. That's I think my overarching concern. I think there are certain types of guns and that don't seem to have productive uses outside of harming other humans. And I think if it were possible to restrict,
I don't do any
the-
hunting at all. All my guns are for self-defense.
Yeah, well, and again, in a situation where everyone can have guns and they're easily accessible, I totally understand that. I do, and I think if it were possible to restrict certain types of guns from being proliferated throughout our society, then that would be ultimately the best case.
Why would you do that? Why would you restrict certain types? Because they all do the same thing.
Well, because certain types enable people to more quickly harm more people and don't necessarily have other productive uses, or could be easily.
Not true. So there's no, you can harm the same amount of people with a handgun you can with a rifle.
I mean, I think, weapons that are able to be very quickly fired versus those that, are meant for shooting things more long range or more slowly fired.
They're only going to fire as fast as that person can pull the trigger. Doesn't matter, because they're all semi-automatic. So as fast as you can move your finger, and ladies can understand this, as fast as you can move that finger, you'll get that round off.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, again, I agree to disagree on this point. I think the societies that don't have, gun ownership of certain types of guns, we see that they don't have anything close to what we have as far as the number of mass shootings and general gun violence. And so I think, again, if it were possible, and I'm not necessarily sure that it is, but if it were possible within our country and our society to limit them, I think that would be better.
You're talking about dismantling the Second Amendment here, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think the modern interpretation of the Second Amendment, which was really 2008, the Heller versus DC case. I think it's a very, very new phenomenon. Even the NRA really didn't take the current interpretation that it protects every individual's right to personally own weapons until the late 70s. So I don't necessarily think that there's firm legal basis on which that right exists. And again, I'm not necessarily saying that it should be completely abolished either. I'm just saying that if it were possible to keep certain types of guns out of society, that I think we'd have a safer society.
I disagree, because a handgun is not going to be any different than a rifle or a shotgun. And then we get caught up in the cosmetics of things, because you have other rifles that will shoot the exact same bullet. People don't consider them, a threat because it looks brown. It's a brown rifle with wood on it. And then you have an AR-15 that that it looks a little scarier, that shoots the same bullet, same caliber. And, people are afraid of that because it's cosmetics, I think, just the way, because it just looks scary. So they all do the same thing, and so I think education is the key. I think the reason why we have gun laws in this country initially in the first place, you go back to the 1700s, because they didn't want free slaves to have access to guns. So the more gun laws you create, you're only going to affect certain type of people. So any new gun laws, any rules you put out there, they're only going to affect certain neighborhoods and certain people. So I don't think we need any laws that many laws at all.
And I agree with that piece. I think the way that gun control has been pursued historically in this country and often today has been highly discriminatory on purpose. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that we should be using people's prior history with what I see as racist criminal legal system as a basis for denying them rights that we call fundamental in our country. I don't think that we should be criminalizing gun ownership the way that it's done, because we see what happens, that more black women are arrested in Chicago for gun ownership than white men, even though they own way, way more guns, right? Like, why is that? Because of where police patrol and how they execute these powers.
I think it's more because we're not educating our communities, because the people that I'm seeing come to class and take a class are the white males. They're coming to class, they're sitting in my class. My classes are packed on Saturdays, and on Sundays, and they're filled with, more with those people, that we're talking about than the other side that we're talking about, because they're educating themselves. And I think education is the key. I spend more of my resources and more of my time telling people, look, you got to understand what the laws are, so that way you know what you can and can't do. People will shock you and surprise you if you sit down and talk to them and ask them a question about gun laws. They'll shock and surprise you. Oh, it's okay for me to, if I get pulled up by police, to pull my gun out and put it on the dashboard. You'd be shocked how many people think that's actually okay.
Right. I mean, obviously, again, in the world that we have with these gun rights and these gun laws, I think obviously education is extremely important. And I think one of the issues that you see with that as well, which leads to, I think in my mind, unjust criminalization is the access, right? Oftentimes maybe the cost for the license, if there's even a permit or license needed in many communities, is low, but where can you go actually to get training? How much does it cost? How do you actually get there? What transportation do you have accessible to you? So again, if you're someone who doesn't have a lot of money, doesn't have a car, doesn't have certain things, then it becomes a situation where it's more difficult for you to comply with these laws.
People have the resources to get downtown 6th Street to the club and party and have a drink, and they can afford buying a drink. Then you can afford, if you're going to carry a gun, you can afford to educate yourself and make sure you know what the laws are so you don't get put in jail. So if you can afford that drink or going down 6th Street and party and getting to the club, then you can afford getting your butt into a class and educating yourself so you don't go to jail. Anybody got anything to say to that?
I'll just say what Chris said earlier. I'd like to live in a society where people don't use force and coercion to tell me what I can and can't do.
And it's up to you. It's going to be up to you. It's your choice to make that decision for yourself and decide, hey, you're going to be subjected to the laws of the state or the county or the city. Zach?
That's true. Yeah.
Chris?
Again, you know more about all the intricacies of this stuff than I do, and I will grant that every day of the week and twice on Sunday. So I'll just say I think there's still much to be desired about how these laws are enforced, and I just want, if we're going to have these rights, then they should exist equally for everybody.
Yeah, and I think we definitely need to be careful because the more laws you put out there, they're only going to affect certain type of people. Those are the people, like you said earlier. We're sending police in the over police communities, and those are the ones going to be affected by any new gun laws that we come down with. If we decide to ban any guns at all, it's only going to affect a certain group of people. And the federal government's doing that right now. The Biden administration is decided to ban certain types of rifles, and I'm already seeing certain people are being affected by the rifles that they're trying to ban. Right now, I have this huge case going against the Department of Justice and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the Cargill versus Garland bump stock lawsuit. And just this week, the Department of Justice decided they were granted a request. They were granted an opportunity for us to not get our bump stocks back. And if you're familiar with bump stocks, it's just a device that goes on the back of the rifle so that a person can actually fire the rifle slightly faster than normal. And what happened was the federal government, the Department of Justice, the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms decided to ban this part of a firearm, and they don't have the authority to do that. Only Congress can create a right law. So this week, Judge Ezra came out and granted the Department of Justice request for an injunction that bump stocks would remain banned while the Supreme Court decides to take up this case. So we'll see what happens. And now the Cargill versus Garland case goes to the Supreme Court. If Supreme Court takes the case, then it will be heard. And if they don't take the case, that case goes back down to the lower court. And so that means bump stocks should be legal in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi if it goes back down to the lower court. But right now, there's a stay, there's an injunction. If you have a bump stock, leave it in that boating accident. Don't recover it, because it's illegal. You're in possession of a felony right now, so you can't have it because the federal government says that's illegal. So we have to wait until the U.S. Supreme Court hears this case. They take it up, they hear it, they rule on it, and then whatever they decide will be the law of the land. So that's going to be your update on the bump stock lawsuit. We have also other cases. A lot of people, talk about some of the good things. They talk about things that, should happen. There are a lot of talk show hosts out there, but I see very few people that actually doing anything. We have so many different court cases that we have going on right now against the Department of Justice, Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in federal court where we're trying to do something. And I think that's the way it's done. And you know whose fault it is? It's going to be Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's going to be her fault. You know why? Because she didn't know when to quit. And because she didn't quit, now the court has shifted a little bit. And so it's going to be in the favor of pro-gun laws because she didn't know when her time was to quit. We come back from the break. We're going to talk about that and more. This is Michael Cargill, and you are listening to Come and Talk It.
This is Coleon Noir, and you're listening to Come and Talk It with Michael Cargill.
Your business is going to have technical problems. There's no question about it. Pacific Office Automation is your guide because problem solving is our passion. Every business is unique, no matter how big or how small the problem. From copiers and printers, telephone systems, managed IT, print services, and more, we offer integrated, streamlined office solutions to keep your office humming. With Pacific Office Automation, it's problem solved. Visit pacificoffice.com today to find out more.
Whether it's a typical traffic stop or you're just involved in a use of force incident, encounters with law enforcement can be scary and stressful. In the heat of the moment, you may inadvertently say something you don't mean or make an inconsistent statement. These are red flags for officers, and if they think you're lying or your story doesn't add up, they might arrest you and let the criminal justice system decide your fate. Police officers are trained to get information from you without making the interaction seem like a formal interrogation. But remember, from the moment an officer arrives on scene, everything you say and everything you do will be scrutinized in court. The prosecuting attorney will attempt to use anything and everything against you. So what do you say? You say, I invoke my right to remain silent, and then let your attorney interact with law enforcement on your behalf. One important note though, do not throw common sense out the window. For example, if the intruder's hiding somewhere in your house when the police arrive, or if you saw the perpetrator pitch his weapon into your backyard, quickly tell the police and then stop talking. You might ask, what about my rights? What if the police never read me my Miranda rights? Miranda rights is the common name for a collection of rights contained in the Miranda warnings, given to suspects when they're placed under arrest. The warning comes from a 1966 Supreme Court case, Miranda v. Arizona. In that case, the court held that statements from a custodial interrogation would not be admissible unless proper procedural safeguards were in place to protect the defendant's Fifth Amendment rights. We've all seen these warnings on TV and movies. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to have an attorney. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, and so on. So do police have to read you your rights? No. It's important to note that officers are not required to read you these rights unless you're in custody and subjected to interrogation. If the police show up to a crime scene and start asking you general questions and you voluntarily tell them everything that happened, those statements can be used against you regardless.
Welcome back to Come and Talk It. And now here's Michael Cargill.
All right, so we got just a few minutes left. I want to see what you guys have to say in closing on what we've been talking about. Police accountability, DPS, the state police assisting the Austin Police Department with their shortage. What's your take?
End the road piracy, get back to community policing, and hire police officers from within the community. End the war on drugs, and let's just make sure that we can get Austin under control without actually focusing on victim crimes.
All right, Zach?
Yeah, if we're going to have less police or not have more police, then we have to handle these issues ourselves and be able to, stop crimes in progress, especially against us with guns.
All right.
So more training, more guns.
All right, Chris?
Yeah, let's focus on the root causes of things and work on prevention as much as we can while obviously trying to intervene in active harmful behavior when it happens.
All right. And this week you have the teenagers, not teenagers, I'm sorry.
Cheerleaders.
The cheerleaders. There are cheerleaders actually, I guess, traveling from somewhere in the Woodlands in Texas there, from the hills or whatever. And they were passing through, coming back to Austin, actually stopped off in Manor where they parked one of their vehicles. And so the cheerleader thought that she was, I guess, going to her vehicle. Turned out it wasn't her vehicle. She actually got in the vehicle. When she got in the vehicle, there happened to be someone else's vehicle, and there was a guy on the passenger side turned out to be his vehicle. And for some reason, he was in the passenger side of the vehicle. This whole thing is kind of weird. So,
Yeah, and then she freaked out, got out of the car, got back into her other friend's car.
yeah.
And then the guy came over.
And some words were exchanged, threw his hands up, whatever that is, and then started firing shots.
And then he pulled a gun out, and then they started to speed away,
Yeah.
and that's when he started shooting at
Right.
them.
Allegedly. Okay, let me throw that in there.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. All right, so a couple things, let's talk about. Let's talk about the Castle Doctrine. Castle Doctrine says that if someone enters your home, enters your vehicle, or your place of business unlawfully, you can use force or deadly force to stop them. So I'm going to go back to, before we do that, let's talk about, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Whenever you decide to pull out your firearm and use it, you need to remember this. You have rights. You need to remember those rights. You have a right to remain silent. You have a right to an attorney. You have a right to have that attorney speak for you. And you might want to exercise that right before you speak to law enforcement. Because if you're involved in a situation, you're probably going to be nervous, you're shaking, you're scared. I guarantee you're going to say or do the wrong thing because you just experienced something you never experienced before in your life. You just fired a gun in defense of yourself, possibly. And guess what? You didn't have any ear protection on. All that and, the pressure of what you just did is going to affect you and any statements that you may think you're trying to make to law enforcement. So exercise those rights to remain silent. Let the police speak for you. Because if someone does enter your vehicle unlawfully, tries to remove you from vehicle unlawfully, you can use force, deadly force to stop that person. Was this situation here? I do not know. I'm just telling you what the law says. Now, a lot of people make the mistake of going to vehicles. It happens all the time. I think we need to settle down and relax and not take things so personal because vehicles, you're in a public place. It's not uncommon for someone to walk up to a vehicle thinking it's their vehicle. And do you truly think that this young lady was a threat enough that you're going to pull a gun out and fire it at her? So you just have to ask yourself that and read the body language of people. We've got to understand each other a little better than that. So there's two sides to every story. We'll find out eventually what's going on here. As this case gets a little closer to court, we'll see, or to a trial or whatever. As more information comes out, we'll see what happens. As always, folks, more guns equals less crime. You go out there and you buy yourself a gun. You've been listening to Come and Talk It with Michael Cargill.